Hi everyone and welcome back to the Hack to the Basics channel. This week we are going to be having a look at an introduction to Burpsuite and how to use the related tools that are within the Burpsuite package. Burpsuite is a proxy that sits in between the application and the network layer, and it allows us to intercept HTTP requests as they are being sent to the server, modify them, and try and attack the underlying server. Reason this is so powerful is that a lot of the time developers will put in client-side validation. So as we discussed in the last video about what is HTTP, your client is your web browser or your mobile application or whatever you're using to actually access the web application. If validation is happening client-side, it means, well, if validation is only happening on client side and not the server side, it can really easily be bypassed using Burpsuite. Because once the request has been sent and it's been captured in the proxy, it's already satisfied all of the client-side requirements, so you can just change values after those checks have taken place and send requests to the underlying server. So firstly, a really important thing to understand about Burpsuite when you're doing any penetration testing or bug bounty hunting is that you need to define a clear scope so that you can make sure you're not accidentally attacking anything that you shouldn't be. So we'll start off by going to our training application here. We want to add this to our scope. So we'll go to target and then scope, and then we're going to select use advanced scope control. That will normally be deselected. We're then going to go to the application. We'll incept the request for now, just so I can show you what it looks like. So here's a request being incepted. As you would have seen in the what is HTTP video, it's using the get method. The resource it's calling is /app2/index.php. It is using the HTTP 1.1 version. Here's the host header. Here's the user agent and the different headers as well that we've discussed. At the moment, this is not configured to be in scope. It's also not configured to be getting server responses, so this is just going to do nothing. Now we can go to our HTTP history and find the request. Add to scope. We want to select no to this because we want it to be accumulating data for other hosts, because you never know when there's a back-end API that you're not necessarily told about that you need to add to your scope for your bug bounty or penetration test. So now if we go back, we can see that it's been added to our target scope tab. We want to change the protocol to any, so we pick up HTTP and HTTPS traffic. At the moment, it's set to only pick up traffic from port 80, which is unencrypted HTTP traffic typically. So we want to remove this so that it's any. And the file means any file after, basically. So now we're going to be intercepting anything from this host from port 80, 443, HTTPS or HTTP. Okay, so now we want to make sure that we have our correct configuration settings to be receiving responses from the server and ignoring other hosts. So we've got intercept requests based on the following rules. We want to tick and request and URL is in the target scope. Scroll down a little bit more. This is in the proxy options tab, by the way. We'll go to intercept server responses. We'll choose all request was intercepted and URL is in scope. Now this is set up in a way that it will only pick up and intercept and hold traffic that is to the domain that I want to be looking at. So for an example, we will search something in Google and it's not being intercepted merely because of our settings. Whereas if we even just refresh this page here, we can see that it's hanging up in the top left corner. That's because it's being received by our proxy. Now that we've added the server response rules, you'll notice that a response actually comes back from this request. So you can see what servers, what software is being used. You can see the HTTP 200 OK response, content length, and a couple of other bits that aren't really that important. So now we know how to set up Burpsuite and how to intercept traffic and set up, configure our traffic to only intercept what we want. We'll start having a bit of a look around and see what Burpsuite's actually capable of. So first of all, this is a really important screen inside your dashboard. This allows you to run something called live scans, so Burp works in live tasks. So if we just go and have a select, we can look at actively scan all in scope traffic through the proxy, and we'll select this and turn this on. Bear in mind that this is going to scan, this is going to hammer any application, so you do need to make sure that there's nothing that you're going to, you're not going to cause any damage, you're not going to hit any contact us forms, for example. That should all be descoped beforehand as well. I'll just quickly show you how to descope. If you go into targets and say we want to descope /admin, we can just put this in here as /admin, and now it will exclude that from scope. It won't scan anything there. So back to our live task, we can choose actively scan. We have chosen that, so we can see that that's showing here now. If we turn this capturing tab off, then it will stop capturing traffic to scan. If we keep it on, it will be scanning all traffic for that host that's going through, obviously only in scope traffic as well. There's also another button up here to pause all tasks at the same time. This is really important to use if you're ever causing any problems, or you're ever seeing any sort of network lag, or your application's behaving really slowly. So we'll just resume that for the time being. Another good way to do this is by going to your sitemap. If you don't want to see all the other hosts that are being called, if you click on here, you can choose show only in scope items, and that will just show the item that you've got in scope. So we can right click here, scan, and then crawl and audit. This will crawl the entire application and it will inject data into it to try and find vulnerabilities. They will then show on this right hand side column in the issues. These are quite cool because you can set your severity, you can choose high, medium, low risk, false positive to keep you basically organized and that kind of thing. But things that come back in here are not necessarily true, so it is always worth checking to make sure that we can checking to make sure that they're correct and they are true. Obviously the unencrypted communications, because this is just on a training application itself. So we've got our scans running in the background. We can see that the crawl's already finished for this because it's a really small page. If we open the tab up here, we can actually see pretty much everything that's happened. So these are all the different requests and areas that it actually scanned. Obviously the more important part for us is in here. So we now know how to use our scope, we now know how to scan, we now know how to use a proxy. We're going to move on to Burp Intruder. So we're going to start off by intercepting a login request. So as you can see here, we're using a post request to the resource app/index.php, and then we got HTTP 1.1, and this is actually the body, so this might be new for you. So this is seeing the body of a post request, so actually sending the data itself. I'm going to right click on here and send to Intruder. Intruder has a couple of different options depending on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to brute force. So this is basically for brute forcing HTTP requests. We've got the sniper option, which is if you're only wanting to attack one variable. You've got the battering ram, which is multiple variables. You've got the pitchfork, which is 2, and the cluster bomb, which allows you to do quite a few. In this case, we're just going to choose cluster bomb. You can click clear here, and then if you want to select where you want to brute force, you just choose add. So we'll go into payloads. So we've got 2 positions because we highlighted 2 different areas. So let's say for the first one, we just want to try we want to try a simple list. We're going to put in admin, administrator. Oh, that's spelled wrong. It doesn't really matter for the purpose of this, and test. And then there are lots of different options here, so you can add runtime files, so you don't even have to copy and paste into here. You can just run it directly from a live file. You can put in numbers, dates, different types of brute forces, username generators. There's all sorts here, but I'm not going to go through all of it for the time being. We are going to use numbers because that's always very important. So say we want to try 1 to 100 with a step of 1, with the maximum integer digits of 1, minimum and maximum integer digits of 1, and the fraction digits is 0, so it's obviously not going to send any fractions. So this will send 100 requests just because it is, we've used the numbers on the first one here instead of on the second request, and then on here we'll keep with the simple list admin, test, administrator. So we have 300 request counts because we're trying admin, test, and administrator against 1 to 100 in every single variable of it. So Burpsuite Pro is quite quick at doing this, as you can see. So we've sent 300 requests very, very, very quickly. You can see the status, you can see the payload that's gone into it. So all these admin test, administrator, and then the different numbers. And then the status, if you click into it, you can see the actual request itself, and then the response and what's been returned. Obviously none of these have worked for now. Cool, so that is Burp Intruder. There's a lot you can do with this. It's definitely worth playing around with. You can have random values in here as well. This is really good for brute forcing potential sort of insecure direct object references. Now we'll have a quick look at the repeater tab. This is particularly helpful if you find a specific request that you want to try and mess with, but you don't want to keep, doing it through the GUI. So right click, send to repeater, send the request through, and now we can modify, change, and send this request as many times as we want. We can look for vulnerabilities, we can look for SQL injection, we can pretty much do anything we want here, and edit it and keep playing it. So really helpful when you're testing APIs. My advice is just to send your Postman or Swagger collection directly through to your Burp proxy and then hold it in a repeater tab. Burp sequencer is pretty cool. We won't go into much detail about this for now because it's not really that important, but you can test for the randomness or entropy of tokens. So you could capture, 100,000 random bearer tokens and see what the entropy's like with them. Decoder, this is quite simple. You can encode and decode values here. So let's encode this as URL. Let's try encoding this as HTML. Let's encode it as base 64. If we copy this, put it up here, if we decode it as base 64, then we can see it. Smart decode, I've never actually seen work before. It's not even working on really simple base 64, so I wouldn't rely on that in any way, shape or form. And this also got some hashing options too, so you can try and hash look at hashing basically. Got comparer, which allows you to send two or more requests and compare them to each other. This is quite cool if you don't really know what the difference is. You can see that there's a different content length by 3 bytes between requests, but you want to see what's actually different there, then you can send it here. In the same way, just intercept it, right click and send to comparer. Burp Extend is really interesting because within here you have the Burp App Store, which allows you to allows you to install add-ons. So I've got JSON Web Tokens and Joseph here, which are both JSON Web Token attacking plugins. But there are quite a few on here. ActiveScan++ is really popular. It's something that I use. I haven't got it activated at the moment, but you can see once you've installed it, you can go here and you can activate your extension. It's probably not going to work. Oh no, it's worked. It's good news. And yeah, you can use pretty much any of these extensions. Got your BAP store, you've got a load of different APIs. You don't need to go into too much detail about this, but if you become fairly fluent with Burp and you're trying to write things for it and write extensions, this is very important. Then you've got your options, so you're going to want to be using Jython really, which is Java Python translation for Burp plugins. So this is basically just pointing to the file that does all of that. Got your project options. This is quite important. If you're ever testing an NTLM application or a basic auth application, you're going to want to put platform auth in, otherwise you're not going to be able to use your proxy properly, or you're not going to be able to see the application with your proxy enabled. We've got upstream proxy servers. These are quite important to use sometimes, so they determine whether Burp's going to send an outgoing request to a proxy server or directly to the web server. You've got your SOX proxy, so you can add SOX proxies in here, and hostname resolution. So if you're sending it through Burp and you don't really want to edit your etc host file, you can just add your hostname resolution in here and it will do it for you. Got some HTTP options in here, some streaming responses, TLS options, some session responses. You can play with Burp's cookie jar and things in here, but that's not too important for now for the generic basics of how to use Burpsuite. And then you've got your miscellaneous tab. So this is quite important. Before you're doing a test and you're running your logging, your scanning, you're going to want to set your requests and your responses to be fully logged. This is just so if anything goes wrong in your test, you can look back at your logs and figure out what's actually knocked over an application or caused issues. User options, you've got your platform authentication, upstream servers, and your SOX proxy and things here. You can see that I often use a SOX proxy of localhost 9595 because this allows me to go directly through a certain proxy. And then if you look in the TLS tab, we've got Java options, we've also got some display options and some miscellaneous options. Cool, so I hope that was a good little tutorial of how to use Burpsuite, and hopefully it will be helpful. Thank you for listening to this tutorial on how to use Burpsuite, and don't forget to subscribe to the Hack to the Basics channel for more tutorial videos.